Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today's webinar is about Real ID, what it is, why it's dangerous, and can you still fly without it after the February 1st deadline for the $45 TSA fee. You will also learn why Citizens Council for Health Freedom is leading this effort against Real ID. After the presentation, we will move into the Q&A. You can find the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will try to answer as many of your questions as time allows. And with that, I am honored to introduce someone who has been at the forefront of this fight for years. Twyla Brace is a registered nurse, public health nurse, co-founder, and president of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. Launched in 1998 to protect patient and doctor freedom, she is the author of 8-time award-winning book, Big Brother in the Exam Room, The Dangerous Truth About Electronic Health Records, and one of the most knowledgeable voices in the country on Real ID and its implications. Twyla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate everyone coming, and I appreciate your interest in this really critical issue. Let me just start with a little tiny bit of history. In 2015, President Obama shouted from the rooftops that you couldn't fly without Real ID in 2016. Well, here we are 10 years later, and now, unfortunately, despite a Republican president in office, the pressure to force you into Real ID has intensified into essentially extortion. Pay or stay. Well, today I'll talk about what Real ID is, the $45 penalty for not having a Real ID or other TSA acceptable identification, how to fly without Real ID or without a penalty, and how to take back your rights and secure your freedom from the digital controls that the federal Real ID system is authorized by law to impose. It's important that you take action to tell everyone what you hear today. It's as simple as starting a conversation with, do you have a federal ID or a state ID? And then the questions and answers can come from there. So there will be Q&A at the end, so answer your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many as possible. Hopefully, I'll answer many along the way. The video of this presentation will be available next week and will be sent to anyone who has registered. So thank you for being here. I'm going to present some informational slides for you. And so I'm going to share those in the very next minute. So let's begin. So here we go. Can you fly without Real ID? Real ID for flight, being required for flight, is a strategy to get you to submit to a national ID. Want to fly? Comply. Well, here's what some people say about this Real ID and the Real ID system. Here's from a New Hampshire State Representative, Joe Alexander, who says the federal government should not be mandating ID for its citizens to travel between states. Just say no. Sarah Palin, former governor of Alaska, says Big Brother is forcing us through more hoops for the right to travel within our own country. Real ID is a national standard and database of IDs that is primarily a tool for control of Americans, says Thomas Massie. And former Congressman Ron Paul says Real ID is one of the greatest threats to American civil liberty in decades. Massie also says Real ID is proof that your physical person matches an entry in the digital database. Its power and purpose will be realized when everyone complies, but not before. Patrick Eddington at Cato Institute says the Real ID Act effectively institutes a form of mass surveillance and verification that does not discriminate between those who have given reason for suspicion and those who haven't. And Oklahoma Senator Kendall Securi, in an emergency petition to Oklahoma Supreme Court just this week, he said an executive agency does not have the authority to unilaterally decide to place Oklahomans' identity data into an interstate data exchange system. Well, let's just look at that. Here is that system, the National Real ID Database located in Mississippi. Probably most of you have not seen this, but it's a contract between AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, and the Mississippi Department of Public Safety. But it's used by most DMVs all around the country to make sure that you can have only one driver's license or one identification card, but it's also a proponent of the Real ID and working to help the entire country be Real ID compliant. Well, despite all of those things that all of those people said before we got to this slide, the TSA doesn't care. Doesn't care about your rights, doesn't care about the civil intrusions, doesn't care. Because on February 1st, 2 days from now, a $45 fine will be exacted upon you if you don't use a real ID or a TSA accepted ID. You will be put in a separate line for biographic and biometric screening. We don't even know what that means exactly. There's no guarantee that you'll pass the test or that you'll be able to fly or that you will make your flight in time. So this is a penalty with a purpose, and the purpose is to get you to comply with Real ID. So the agenda for today's presentation here is a short description of our organization so you know who we are and why we're doing this to stop Real ID. You'll hear the realities of the federal ID system, the coercion of TSA and the Department of Homeland Security, how to fly without Real ID, how to file a complaint, actions to take, and then questions and answers, Q&A. So who is CCHF, Citizens Council for Health Freedom? Well, our mission is to protect patient and doctor freedom, and we've been doing it since 1998. But you might wonder, why is a health freedom organization leading the charge against Real ID? And that is a very good question. I have three answers. One, we realize what Real ID is. And so we realize it's likely to lead to no card, no care. And so what the law says is that DHS can impose the Real ID requirement for almost anything. And so that it could do it for medical care. And we believe that requiring it for medical care would force everybody to comply because 47% of all medical care is paid for by the government. And it would be very easy for the Department of Homeland Security to say the next required use for Real ID is medical care. The second reason that we're doing this is because we're known for what we do to protect privacy, because we believe that privacy is the foundation of freedom. He who holds the data makes the rules, and every tyrant knows this, and that's why they create surveillance systems. And then third, we're perhaps the most battle-ready organization in the United States because we've been fighting against the Real ID in Minnesota since 2008. And that means we have got lots of information, background information about Real ID that a lot of people don't have. I'd like to just take this moment to ask you to partner with us in this battle against Real ID because that's what it's going to take. We need you to be talking to people, but we'd also love to have you donate $45 today to stop the Real ID system. Why $45? Because instead of paying $45 to the TSA, we'd love you to pay it to us so that you can join this battle, because that's what it is. It's a battle to save us from the Real ID system and from the tyranny that is going to happen if the Real ID system is fully imposed. So just take this opportunity to donate $45 today. We'd love to see $45 coming in, and then we know that you have joined with us in this critical battle. You can use the QR code or go to cchfreedom.org. All right, let's talk about Real ID. Real ID is a federal ID, and it's masquerading as a state driver's license. If you have a Real ID in your pocket, you do not have a driver's license. The federal government is simply allowing the state to use the federal ID for driving and use it as a driver's license, but it isn't. It's a federal ID. U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander on the floor of the Senate in May of 2005, right before it was passed, he said, "This really is a national identification card for the United States of America. We shouldn't be doing it without a full debate." But of course, there wasn't a full debate, and they simply passed it. So now what we have here is a Real ID, which is a national ID. It's unconstitutional. It violates privacy rights under the Fourth Amendment plus other amendments. And it is federal commandeering of the states. So we had a legal analysis done of Real ID by Scott St. John, the former Solicitor General of Louisiana. And he said it's a novel form of coercion. And by that, what he meant is that the federal government says to the states, no, you do not have to conform, you don't have to comply with us, but if you don't, we will not let your people fly. So a novel form of coercion. Thus, it's unconstitutional. It's a federal takeover of identification, so they're really nationalizing identification. It's a violation of states' rights under the 10th Amendment, and it's a violation of your rights under the 10th Amendment. Because as you may recall, the 10th Amendment says that the federal government is limited to the powers that are given under the Constitution, and all other powers are reserved to the states and to the people, and that's you. Well, Real ID is about more than flight, because this is the law. What you're looking at right here is the law. So the official purpose of Real ID has to do with accessing nuclear facilities, federal buildings, commercial flight. But then it adds those words that you see there underlined in red. And any other purposes that the Secretary shall determine. Any other purposes. Secretary of Homeland Security does not have to go to the President or to Congress because by law, he or she can simply expand what Real ID is required for. So in essence, it can become a domestic passport. Federal control over all of life, every transaction, all movement, all access, whatever the Secretary decides. So here are some realities about Real ID. Those future required uses: access to medical care, buying a gun, opening a bank account, accessing your own bank account, going to college, getting a job, voting. And then another reality is that their plan is to digitize it, put it on your phone, and have remote access. And that is testimony from ANVA, that organization that represents the DMVs. That's testimony to Congress in December of 2023. That's their plan. And then the Real ID rule requires a biometric. So they're moving toward biometric control, digital biometric control. What they're building is a facial recognition system through the Real ID Act. Digital biometrics starting with the face, but then it could be fingers, as it is already in Colorado and Oklahoma. So here is what Robert Mockney, the head of the Department of Homeland Security in 2007, said. He said, "We're starting the process of biometrifying a good proportion of the world population." Now, this should strike you as very interesting. Robert speaks as a we. We're starting the process for the world population. So you can see this is much bigger than the United States. And who is one of the clear proponents of this? IDEMIA. IDEMIA, you might never heard of IDEMIA, but if you've ever flown, you've gone by that word IDEMIA time after time after time, because IDEMIA runs the TSA checkpoints. And the next time that you fly, look for the equipment that's around the TSA agents, and you will see IDEMIA written all over it. Well, IDEMIA has a $46 million TSA contract, and they are working to make sure that they have biometrics and they are digitized. Here's their goal: augmented authentication. Augmented authentication. They want you to be your ID, digitized biometrics. But I was just listening to Andrew Bridgen, the former member of the House of Commons in the Parliament, and he got really passionate when he said this statement: digital ID is the cornerstone of Agenda 2030. And for those of you who know what Agenda 2030 is, it comes out of the UN, and they're talking about, having peace and prosperity and equity and everything across the entire globe. So this is a global agenda, and the digital ID is the cornerstone of it because it implements control. So what could this digital biometric controlled Real ID become? It could become a vaccine passport, a unique patient ID for medical records, a global digital ID, and it could be part of a social credit system or a carbon credit system if it is attached to your financial records and connected to your bank. So people who already have a phone that they use to pay and have a digital ID on should be thinking about where this could lead. But will Real ID keep us safe? And here is what the Solicitor General of Louisiana said in the legal analysis. The Real ID Act is a worst of all worlds design. It's largely ineffective vis-a-vis actually establishing the identity of aliens and excluding illegal aliens from the transportation system, It imposes billions of dollars in unfunded mandates on states, and it gravely threatens citizens' privacy and civil liberties. But isn't it just for citizens? It is not. And here is a quote from our own government about citizens of foreign countries who may apply for a real ID. And here's another quote. Non-citizens in a variety of categories can get a real ID. So now let's talk about TSA coercion. This is the Transportation Security Administration. Well, this has been a long time coming, but in September they proposed a rule at the end of the Biden administration, a progressive enforcement rule. They're planned to spend the next 2 years, starting on May 7th of 2025, progressively enforcing Real ID. Well, when we got wind of it, there were only 63 comments, and it was a 30-day comment period. And by the end of it, because we started an entire campaign to get public comments, by the end of it, there were 31,764 comments. And if you look at that orange rectangle down there, you can see that that's exactly what it says. That's how many comments that they got. But when they released their final rule, this is what they said. During the 30-day comment period, DHS received over 11,000 comments. Well, what should they have said? They should have said over 31,000, or they should have said nearly 32,000, but they didn't. They virtually dismissed most of the comments. They also dismissed the fact that anybody talked about constitutional rights because they said we handled that in the 2008 proposed rule and final rule, and so we're not even discussing it here. Okay, so that 11,000 was one of their tall tales. And so let's just talk about some of the tall tales coming out of Homeland Security and the TSA. So I just gave you a timeline here. September is when that proposed rule was. The final rule had the misleading tally of 11,000. That was January of 2025. Well, the lies and tall tales just continued. So Trump's Secretary of DHS, Kristi Noem, she lied on April 25 when she said, you have to have a real ID to fly. Well, she knew that she had a 2-year progressive enforcement here, but she didn't bother to tell anybody. And she didn't tell anybody about the other kind of IDs that you could use. She said you need a real ID to fly. She lied again on May 7th when she said if you come to the airport today without a real ID, you won't be able to fly. Now then, more recently in November, the TSA put out a notice of this new fee for a traveler program. Well, we'll talk about how it's not really a fee, it's a fine, and it's not really a traveler program. And then they put out a press release shortly after that, which talked about a $45 fee option, but it's not really an option if you want to fly. And then I just showed you the TSA deadline, which is 2 days from today before they begin that $45 penalty. The progressive enforcement deadline is a year and a half away, May 5th, 2027. Well, not quite a year and a half. And then what other tall tales could come out next when they are not successful? Because that's our plan. We are not going to let them be successful with bringing us a digital ID in this country for control of all of life. But I want to show you this lie because this is such a blatant lie by Kristi Noem in her Instagram. Starting today, May 7th, you will need a real ID to fly. Let's talk about some of the other tall tales. What is a traveler program? Because see, the TSA is claiming that they have by law the ability to start and create registered traveler programs. And they can impose a fee for any registered travel program undertaken by Homeland Security. Well, is this really a traveler program? Because let's look at the other travel programs. Global Entry. It costs $120 and it lasts for 5 years of travel. TSA PreCheck costs $80, lasts for 5 years of travel. This new Confirm.ID program, $45 for 10 days of travel. This is a fine, but they would call it registration. And they have determined, see, and that's the thing, they have determined they didn't do any public comment period. They didn't put out a proposed rule, a proposed a payment, a new registration system, a new program recording system. They didn't do any of that. They just determined that this fine counts as being registered and this program is a registered traveler program. So you might ask, why the lies, why the deception, why the $45 fee, why the dubious definitions? Well, they're desperate. It's been 20 years, and only 56% of all driver's licenses and IDs in circulation today are Real ID compliant. In 34 states, it's less than 60% of them. And of those 34 states, in 22 of them, it's less than 40% of them. So they are desperate to get all of us into the Real ID. Let's look at what the compliance rate is in different states so you understand what's going on. Illinois, only 35%. Iowa, 76%. Kansas, it's 86%. Minnesota, 35. Well, in Mississippi, it's 97%. But in Mississippi, it's one of the 5 states that don't give you a choice and say you have to have a Real ID. But let's look at New Jersey at only 17%. Now, Maine, I have 19%, but I have heard that it's up around 22 or 23%. South Dakota is 99% only because they started immediately to issue Real IDs, took state IDs out of the equation, but now people are realizing they can get state IDs if they just ask for them, and they are. So how to fly? That's part of why you're here. How to fly. There are 17 TSA acceptable IDs, including the new acceptance of mobile driver's licenses. And so we've been saying 16, but they have just added this to the list, the mobile driver's licenses. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these 17 IDs, but I just want to say that in pink, I put the new ones down. And you can look at this video when it comes to you after this presentation. And you can look at this at more detail or just go to the TSA website. But here also in pink, you see Apple Digital ID, Clear ID, and Google ID Pass. And they say they are testing these, but what this is interesting because their intent is to get all of us into a digital ID. Those are digital IDs. They want everybody into a digital ID, however they can get them there. And they don't want to say that they have failed on the Real ID or getting everybody with a digital ID at the airport. So that's what's going on here. So how to fly? Get a passport and a passport card. Get the passport card at the same time. It's only $30 more, and it's as small as a driver's license. So do that. Now, how to fly without Real ID or accepted ID. I'm just going to go back here for a moment. Get the passport because you want to be able to sleep at night. You want to be able to know that you can fly. They can't take away the fact that you can fly with a passport because, of course, you can fly around the world with a passport. So this is your guarantee of flight. But what you don't want to do is give them what they want, which is a Real ID, because they have a whole different plan for the Real ID than the passport. Okay, so how to fly without a Real ID or acceptable ID, which means without even a passport. How are you going to do it? So let's talk about this TSA penalty. This, over on the left, it says this $45 fee option for air travelers without a Real ID, which starts in 2 days. But you'll notice there that the date is January 15th, 2026. Well, the press release actually came out in December, but they've been adding things to their press release, so they've been updating the date. And one of the things they added, you see on the right, this TSA Confirm ID. The steps for you to be at home, pay the $45 penalty, and come with your receipt to the airport. And remember, this is good only for 10 travel days. They want you to pay this fee at home. So they're encouraging you to take 10 to 15 minutes and get a digital receipt, paying by credit card, and then come to the airport, present the receipt. But instead, we want you to pay at the airport. Make the $45 penalty visible. Let everybody know this is not a traveler program. You're paying a fine for your freedom. You are not registering for a so-called traveler program. And then you can engage in a variety of ways. Be visible as you pay, post it on social media. The longer the line, the better. It's going to make them have to do something about this. Come early to deal with these sorts of things. Report whatever you experience. Report it to us. Report it on social media. We have the refuserealid.org website where you can talk about your stories. Consider lawsuits. If you have the capacity to lawsuits, sue against the even the claim that this is a registered traveler program that they could just start without any public comment, without going through the Administrative Procedures Act. Sue for the fact that they don't allow you to pay cash. You have to connect it with your financial records in order to pay this penalty. Now, do you need any kind of ID these days to come to the airport with this new Confirm ID in progress? Well, it's not clear because there's no law in our land that requires you to have an ID to fly. And there has been a long-standing protocol if you forget it, lose it, or have it stolen. Well, and then there's Gilmore versus Gonzalez, a court case where the person did not present an ID and wanted to get the court to rule that there's no law that requires an ID in this land. But the court did not answer that question. The court instead said that that person who was refused flight could simply have submitted to a more extensive security screening, the one that happens to you if you forget, lose, or have your ID stolen. Let's just look for a second at the non-compliance rates because it really makes a difference here, and you can see what the money is. So 6% of travelers do not have a real ID according to the TSA, or an acceptable ID, which is about 200,000 adult travelers per day. Now let's do the math because it's $45 for each of these people, and that would be $9 million or $328 billion a year. If I've done the math wrong, feel free to just let me know, but that's what I've come up with. Now, is TSA impatient? And are they impatient because they want this money, or are they impatient because they want you into a real ID? But the interesting thing is, back with their proposed TSA rule in September of 2024, they did not want the distractions caused by additional identity verification procedures. They did not want to turn away individuals who did not have acceptable identification, but this $45 fine and doing it right now is where they're going with that. That's what they're going to. So let's just look at your action options because we really need you to engage. First things first, if you don't have a real ID, an ID with a star on right now, don't get one. But the second thing is, if you have one, make the switch. So on the left, you'll have the real ID. You can see the star up there in the corner. On the right, you can see the non-real ID, the standard state driver's license, which says not for real ID purposes, or it might say not for federal identification purposes. Different states do it differently, but it does not have a star. And you can go to Refuse Real ID for more information on how to make the switch. And while you're there, after you have made the switch, come on back to refuserealid.org and tell us that you made the switch. On the top, you have the green map. So it's like green, you got the green light to go and you made the switch. They let you make the switch. On the bottom, you tried to make the switch, but they said no. It was a stop sign for you at the DMV. We want to know because it's interesting already as people are registering, whether they tried or they actually got to make the switch. We can see that it's happening in both states. Like, one state will have a whole bunch of people who could make the switch, but a few people who couldn't. Well, then clearly it's not state law in that state. And what you have is a rogue DMV agent or agency who's just not going to let you make the switch. So do come back and let us know what happened. Now, in 5 states, there is no option for a standard state driver's license. You cannot make the switch because they have outlawed it in those states. Interestingly enough, they are all Republican states: Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Wyoming, and Georgia. But you should be talking to your governors and your legislators in those states and get them to change it because, really, we're moving to China with Real ID. That's what's going on here, but they don't understand it, and you have to help them know. And we are working with state legislators all around the country. So refuserealid.org will give you information, including lose the real ID. You see it right there in the middle. If you have a rogue DMV agent, this is the document you need with you because it's a 2-sided document, but it tells you how to deal with when someone tells you, no, you can't make the switch. You have questions to ask them, managers to get, you'll have to have a battle, but that's kind of what it is for freedom these days. Okay, here's a few other things you can do. You can complain to the TSA in person at the checkpoint. I'm not going to go through all of these because we have a one-pager for you at refuserealid.org. And so just know this: in person at the checkpoint, There's a TSA contact center, and you can go online through social media, text, or you can call them on the phone. And then you can contact the Department of Homeland Security, their Traveler Redress Inquiry Program. And they have a list of things here, if you were denied or delayed airport boarding, which could happen to you if you are stuck in that line for biometric screening after you paid your $45 and they're trying to figure out if you're really you. Here is the one pager that you can find at refuserealid.org, and you can take it with you to the airport in case you want to contact CSA or DHS right when you're there in the airport. All right, other things you should do. Talk to your policymakers. Most of them are clueless. I remember when we stopped the digital ID in Minnesota, the legislators there did not understand that if you have a digital ID, that means that there's a digital system, a database in the background created by the government that every time you pull out your digital ID and use it, it pings the government. They didn't realize that, and they didn't want the digital ID anymore. And so we just shut down that bill because of that piece of knowledge. So you need to talk to everyone that you can about what the truth about Real ID is. Meet with your state legislators. Bring them some of the information from refuserealid.org. Tell them what this thing is. They don't see China yet, but that's what they should be seeing. Congress, send a quick pre-written message to Congress. Go to refuserealid.org and click on the Take Action links. We have given you messages, so all you have to do is click. And if you put in your state and your address, it'll send it exactly to the right members of Congress. And contact Senator Paul's office. And the very best way to do this is to call. Put in a call. Thank him for his repeal Real ID bill, S-2769, and ask him to hold a hearing on it. He is chair of the Senate Homeland Security, and he can do that. And he needs a lot of encouragement because the pushback is going to be great, probably from his own members of Congress. So help him move in this direction. And again, what I said, start a conversation, start a discussion with members of the American public who think that this is going to solve illegal immigration in the state, in the country. It's going to, bring us more security, but no, it's going to bring us closer to a social credit system like is in China. It's going to put all of this control and surveillance over this country. So just ask them, do you have a federal ID or a state ID? They'll bring out their ID and you can start the discussion. There are pocket cards to pass out, refuserealid.org. Just download them today. Or you can send us a donation of any amount, and we will send you 10 to 20 cards, whatever you'd prefer. Ask people to go to these different podcasts where we have talked about it. You can send them this video that we're making right now as I speak. You can send them to the Dark Horse podcast, which is very popular, or to Jimmy Dore, which is even more popular. We just came out yesterday with a new video, Why Are People Opposed to Real ID? You can find that at Refuse Real ID and share it. Put up a Real ID billboard. Here's the one that's up in Minneapolis now and in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Take a photo with this truck if you see it, and we're going to make the art on this truck even more visible in the near future. But if you see it, it's going around the country. So do that. And then two things to remember as I conclude here. This video is available next week, and we will be sending it to anyone who registered. Please consider a donation of $45 to join what we're doing here to stop Real ID. It's critical to the freedom of the country. It's critical for your freedom to not be part of a big surveillance system, nationwide facial recognition system. So we would love to see $45 coming in to stop Real ID and know that you're joining with us in this battle. So just use that QR code or the CCHfreedom.org, our website, and you can donate there with the red donate button. So to contact me, here's the information for me, but it also has info at cchfreedom.org, and then the Facebook page, and then my where I am on X. So that there are a variety of ways. So thank you very much for staying with us to hear everything about Real ID, but I know that you've got questions. I know that there are questions that have been coming in before we even started this. And Alexandra is going to give those questions to me, and I'm going to ask you to be brief, to make sure your questions are relevant to Real ID, and to just know that if we don't get your questions answered, you can certainly go to info@cchfreedom.org and ask for those questions. So thank you again for your interest and your engagement in this topic. So I am going to stop sharing, and that will let Alex ask those questions of me. Thank you so much. I'll see you in a moment.
Our first question is from John, who asked if the Minnesota Enhanced ID is a real ID.
If a Minnesota Enhanced ID is a real ID. Well, they count it as a real ID. And so I think you should consider it to be a real ID. And so I do encourage people to go get a standard driver's license. Often in the states that have the enhanced real ID, what you've got is they have put the star up in the corner. So from their perspective, you have joined the real ID system. So I would just encourage you to go back to a standard state driver's license.
DR asked, even if we avoid the real ID, isn't the passport application process going to integrate all of the biometrics into it?
Okay, so it's two different systems. One is within the State Department, and the other is within Homeland Security, as well as the information that's going into the DMVs. So they're not fully connected, but we have learned that AMVA is talking with Homeland Security. What you have to understand is it's bigger. It's bigger than what you're even thinking of here. We're looking at an ID that they want to digitize that ID. They want to digitize the federal ID. They want the biometrics with the federal ID, and they can expand it to all sorts of different uses, as I pointed out, healthcare, guns, banking, working, etc. That's their big plan. They would put that one as a global ID. They really can't do that with the passport or the passport card. They can't do that because that's what you need to be able to travel across the world. Now, if they decide to do that, we'll all get wind of it. But the American people haven't got wind of it. Everybody who's listening here has got better wind of what their plans are than most people in the world. But what we have to do is thwart their plan, not just think about, well, do we have biometrics elsewhere? Do we have identification information elsewhere? We have to thwart their plan. And their plan is a digital biometric controlled federal real ID for everyone in this country. And they're using the airports to convince you to give up your rights, give up your Fourth Amendment rights, give up your 10th Amendment rights in order to fly. And if you won't comply, my guess is that they will do it in order for you to get medical care. That will be their next attempt.
And then Michael asked, what about the database? So if they have all your info in the database when you are getting a passport, why does it matter if you don't get a real ID if they have your data anyway?
But they don't have, anytime they want something and they're trying to force you into something, they don't have what they want. And the important thing is to not give them what they want. If you look at all your different data in different places, it's all siloed, but they're hoping to have it all into one big data real ID system, all of it in one place together. Right now it's siloed in different places. And so, yeah, you've got that kind of data, but you haven't given them what they want, and you have to not give them what they want. So you have to stop the real ID because that is what they want, and they don't have it yet.
And then we have an anonymous question asking, are the government IDs required by the IRS and Social Security part of the real ID system?
So some people have said that they're thinking that that when they're being asked to provide an ID for these systems, that they're being required to provide a real ID, but that can't be the case at this moment because those systems are up and running, and people all across the country, as you can tell by the statistics that I showed, do not have a real ID. And so that ID is whatever ID that you have through the state. It certainly could be a real ID that you could use. But again, there's nothing that I know of that requires it for those systems. They might try. It could be something that they would try to do. And we do have state legislators, for instance, who are looking at requiring people to have a real ID to vote. Well, That is a terrible, terrible idea. So it could happen at the state level where the state says you have to have a real ID for these things, but those are state legislators not realizing that this is a federal ID under federal control, leading to the possibility of it all being digitized and under federal control. And the last thing that you want is to have your elections under federal control, whereas a digital ID, they can just turn it off. And suddenly you can't vote. You can't you can't go buy groceries. In India, when they did the national ID system, because that's what this is leading to, is a national ID system under the federal ID. In India, there were stories of people starving to death because they couldn't convince people. The system didn't work, and their so-called national ID wasn't in the system the way it needed to be, and stores wouldn't sell them groceries. And people actually died. There was a story of 24 people starving to death and dying because they couldn't get anybody to believe in their ID. It was essentially turned off. They were now a non-person.
That ties, the election part of that ties well into what Rob said. He has been looking into the mega omnibus legislation that looks like another sneaky way to nudge people into Real ID by making it difficult to vote and claiming they have to do this to make elections great again. What do you think about this?
Well, I just think there are the people who know and there are the people who don't know what they're talking about. I actually don't believe that people in this country want to become what we saw that China is during COVID, right? We saw that kind of control over the people. We saw that they couldn't leave their home without the government knowing it. We saw drones that went out to find them and said, you're supposed to still be in your home because everything came out of the phone. And when you have the DMVs testifying to Congress that their plan is to digitize the real ID, put it on your phone and have remote real-time access to your phone, you know that certain people know this, but there's a bunch of people, just like the legislators in Minnesota, who didn't realize that you would ping the government every time you use your digital ID. I think there's just a lot of people who are buying the lies that this is going to help with illegal immigration and with security for the country. But as our legal analysis shows, that's not true. But also, recently, the Homeland Security said in papers filed in a lawsuit in December about I think it was a truck driver or somebody that they caught who gave them a real ID, and the police didn't believe the real ID. And actually, Homeland Security in that court case, in that lawsuit, they filed and they said that the real ID is insufficient for verification of identity. So what are we talking about here, right? So Homeland Security even knows that this is insufficient, but there's another agenda at play here. And that agenda is a digital ID, biometric control, and probably being attached to a global identification system of control.
We also have a lot of users asking, what is the benefit of getting a passport card if one already has a passport?
Ah, well, that's pretty simple. You know what a passport looks like. It's a book. It's got pages in it, right? You need it to travel. A passport card, I like to travel overseas. A passport card you cannot use to travel overseas. It has more limited use as to where you can use it, but it is the same size as a driver's license. And so you can just tuck it away. You can carry it like that. Do you really want to take your passport book with all those pages, which you would need to fly internationally? Do you really want to take that all over the country and risk losing it? Far better to risk losing a passport card than to risk losing the passport book that could get you in and out of the country.
And then we have an anonymous user asking, can I fly if I don't have a passport or a real ID?
Well, if you saw that one slide where I was talking about, there are 17 different identification cards, plus all these new digital versions that TSA is allowing. So without a real ID or a passport, you could certainly use one of those others. And then of course, there is just this procedure that they have for when you have lost or have it stolen or you forgot it. You came to the airport or you forgot it in your car. I did that once. It's like I got all the way into the van that was going to take me to the airport, and I suddenly realized that I had left it at home. And so that that was not good, but luckily I was really early. And so I was close. So I just went home, got it, and I made my flight. But in that kind of case, you could be in the airport when you make that discovery, and there is an entire process, and often that process goes like this, because I lost it once in the airport, where they take you to a little table, and there's a phone on that table, and the TSA agent picks up the phone, and they give your information as much as you give them without an ID, and they start asking you questions. What was your first email address? What was the color of your first car? And they will ask you questions until you have answered sufficiently for them to believe that you are who you say you are. Now, some would say even that is not by law something that they can do because there's no law that requires you to have an ID to get onto a plane. But that is the process that would let you get onto the plane. It's enhanced screening.
Dawn said that her sister recently moved from Texas to Minnesota and discovered that she was automatically issued a real ID despite not applying. She would like to know if this is legal and wasn't there meant to be additional paperwork and documentation needed to get a real ID?
So that's very interesting. And see, I think that, if you saw that diagram of the database, the National Real ID database that was created by AMVA, what you saw there is, I would believe that Minnesota saw, by looking into that database, they saw that she already had a real ID because Texas does not give you any choice. They saw that she had a real ID, so they just issued her a real ID because all the paperwork that she needed for the real ID in Texas had already been submitted. So you can see the nationalization that's already occurring here just by what happened to her. And so she can go, she's in Minnesota, she can just go back to a DMV and say, I want a standard driver's license. And in Minnesota, people are successfully getting them because we fought for 2 years to the mat to stop real ID in the state. And the forms that you get when you go to the DMV give you a choice at the top for choosing between an enhanced and a real ID and a standard state driver's license. That's what you have as a choice in Minnesota.
Jenny asked, how do we fight this if our state is one of those that gives us no choice? She has already written to her representatives in Texas and seen no movement.
Well, of course, you're not going to see any movement because they really believe in real ID because they think it's going to secure the border, particularly in Texas, right? It's going to secure the border and save us from illegal immigrants, and it's going to do all of this. What really has to happen here is you have to set up a meeting. And you have to bring the information, set up a meeting. Maybe you want to bring other people with you. That's even better. You can say you've got a group of 10 people who want to meet with legislator XYZ, right? Have this meeting, present all of this stuff, talk about the different states where they're trying to get out of real ID. Maine, Laura Libby in Maine, she actually had 5 Democrats on her bill, and she's a Republican. There are other states where they are moving in the direction of getting out of real ID because they realize what it is. I will just bet those people that you're trying to connect with don't know. So get more people together to talk with them in their who are constituents. Be their constituents and talk to them. Set up a meeting.
Could you walk people through the process they need to go through to change their real ID to a standard license? And is there a fee for doing this?
So I'm not going to talk through the process. I'm going to ask people to go to refuserealid.org and get that one pager that I showed, which is called Lose Your Real ID, and it is detailed step by step by step, and what to do with rogue DMV agents if you actually have the ability to change in your state. So that is the process that I encourage you to follow. And what was the second part of that question?
Is there a fee for changing to a
Oh,
standard license?
yes, there's typically a fee. Even like if you lose your ID, there's a fee, to get another one. So I think you should expect a fee, but it's a small fee for your freedom and for stopping what is the big plan here, which is to get to a national identification system under federal control, biometrically controlled, digital. This is a very small fee to thwart what's going on here.
Amy asked what can be done in a situation where her sister is getting threatening letters from the state due to her upcoming birthday in February since she does not have a real ID.
Oh, I'd love to see those letters. Send those letters. Do we know what state Amy is in?
No, we do not. Maybe she can answer in the chat and
Okay.
then can
Okay.
draft that in.
Somebody can let us know,
Yep.
right? So a threatening, and what is a threat? They're probably just trying, unless it's a state, well, no, if it's a state that requires it, you don't even have a choice. So I'm very curious as to what state is sending those threatening letters and what's the language, because that's really important. And maybe that could even lead to a lawsuit in the future. So keep those letters and send us those letters.
Michael asked about ID.me. How does that tie into this?
We don't know that that ties into it, but of course, the entire government is trying to move everyone to digital this and digital that. They want everything in digital and they want the connection with your bank accounts, where you pay digitally. All of that is part of the planning of just moving everything into digital. So we don't know yet that there's any connection, but we're not saying that there isn't one. We just haven't heard of one yet.
Lori asked, will any of this apply to train travel?
That's a very good question. I think, when you look at the possibility of what the law says, I mean, that's something that Homeland Security could easily say. It's not just going to be for commercial flight. We're just going to, because it's any other purpose that the secretary shall determine. That's what the language said. And so the secretary could just say, we have it for commercial flight. We're going to have it for commercial rail. So the secretary could do that. The secretary, the next administration secretary, it's the law of the land that the secretary can expand the required uses. And it's open-ended. It could be anything.
And we have an anonymous user asking if all CDLs are forced to be Real ID.
So we have heard rumors of that. Haven't actually had the time yet to look into that, but here's what's really interesting about that is in the news probably about 2 months ago, maybe, there was a man who was a trucker who was stopped by the police. He had a CDL and it came, I believe, from New York. And New York was so liberal about who got real IDs that they gave this trucker a real ID. And in one of the name places, it said something like name withheld or something like this. So here's a real ID, an immigrant with a real ID, I think an illegal immigrant with a real ID. They didn't even have the full name on the real ID. And so when we just look at these requirements, and supposedly this is for safety and security, we can see that some states have decided that this real ID is just another way to get illegal immigrants to look like legals. So I don't know for sure about CDLs, and we haven't been able to look fully into that yet. But I have heard some people have said that that might be a possibility across the country.
If you switch back from a Real ID to a standard driver's license, don't they already have all of your information in the database? Why is it important to switch?
Okay, so two things about that, and one of them is about what legislators across the country are now trying to do to thwart this, as well as what we can do to thwart this. Again, remember the big agenda. You have to be focused on the big agenda. Do not be focused on what identification information that they have on you today. The big agenda is to get a real ID that's digital, that collects information on you every day with everything that you do once this system is fully in place, just like it is in Canada. So the fact that you have given a small amount of information that is in a database somewhere is yes, it's important, but it's not important when you look at what the big agenda is, which is that they will collect data on you everywhere on everything and then use it to control your entire life. The other thing about that is with what legislators are trying to do. So there are bills that will be coming out in a variety of states that we as an organization are working with. We're helping them to craft their legislation because they want to extract themselves from Real ID or to protect you from Real ID. And so there are things like requiring all the data that you gave for Real ID to be jettisoned, to be deleted from the systems, or to give you the right to not have a biometric photo. And they would have to have a regular camera at the DMV to take a regular picture, not a digital picture. So, this is a process to give you back your freedom, but try to look at the big picture rather than than the fact that they've gotten this information, this small amount of information right now, and realize that they're looking forward to basically a full profile of everything you do every day and how they can control whether you can or cannot do those things in the future.
Margot asks, is the $45 fee a one-time fee for not having?
Mm. No, it's such a good question. It's maybe you just missed it or just came in later from my slideshow and you can look at it. It's a $10 fine. It lasts for 10 travel days. So if you have a 2-week trip, you're going to have to pay it coming and going. And so it only lasts for 10 days. That's why it's not a traveler program. If it were a traveler program, it'd be like for a year and you'd pay $45 for a year, but it isn't. It's meant to make you suffer pain until you comply and submit to the Real ID system. That's why get a passport card, refuse the Real ID at all costs, and recognize that what they're doing here is imposing painful restrictions, painful waiting lines to try to get you to submit. But no, it's only lasts for 10 days.
Cynthia asks if she could use her military ID and not pay the $45.
Yeah, so on that list, there is the Department of Defense. You can check to see what kind of military ID is because I'm not sure about all of the different kind of military IDs. I think that fits within the Department of Defense, but take a look at that list of 17 acceptable IDs, and I believe that you will find that your ID is on there.
A lot of questions asking if you can repeat where they can find the handouts and cards and that information.
Sure. Go to refuserealid.org. Refuserealid.org.
Anonymous user said they recently got a new passport, but it came with a star on it, and they asked if that means it is digitized.
Wow. A passport with a star?
Yep.
This is new. This is new. This person has got to take a picture of what this looks like because I can't even answer the question. I don't know what that means. And so I would love to have this person take that picture and send it to info@cchfreedom.org. info@cchfreedom.org. And you can go to our website or even to the refuserealid.org website and you'll find our contact information on there. We need to see what that is. I've never heard of that before.
And I think this will be the last question. TSA, when you go to the airport, do they scan your biometrics, store your biometrics? Is that already getting it into the system?
Okay, so, such a great end question. Do not let them take your photo at the airport. So I believe that what they're doing is training their systems. Again, this is IDEMIA, and they've got the contract with the TSA. They've got the cameras at the driver's license bureaus. They've got the cameras at the TSA, and they are, supporting the Real ID program. I think you should notice that it says that you can opt out of that picture. The most important thing, you don't have to, but it will save you lots of time and trouble and conversation with the TSA agent, is if you keep your hands behind you when you approach them. And the first thing that you do is tell them, I'm opting out of the camera. If you put your hands ahead of you, you might accidentally give them your ID or boarding pass. And then they'll put your ID in the system. And then they will tell you, you can't opt out now because you already gave us your ID. But that's not true. There's nothing that says that anywhere. You can opt out at any time, but it will save you a lot of tension. If you just tell them I'm opting out and they'll say, okay, and they won't press the button on the machine. And then they'll just ask you for your ID and your boarding pass at that point. And so I think what they're doing there is not only training, but when they say that they're going to delete your photo from that camera as you approach the TSA station and you stand there, don't stand in front of it. Don't be any part of it. But I think what they're doing when they say, we'll delete your photo, yeah, they might be deleting your photo, but are they deleting the digital data points that could be collected from that camera at that moment? I don't know. Just don't submit to the program and tell everybody around you. Did you know you can opt out of the camera? It's creating a facial recognition system across the nation. It's helping to identify you whether you're wearing glasses or a hat or your hair is longer or you've got a beard. I think it's training the systems of how to recognize you on the street and in the airport.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I was planning to have sort of a to-go slide to add, but I accidentally clicked out of the program. So I'm just going to say to you, so thank you so much for joining us today, for being interested in this. Please engage everybody that you know on this issue so that we can move to stop Real ID and this entire national digital takeover of the entire system through a new identification system. And go to refuserealid.org if you need more information, and don't miss our brand new video on what Real ID is, which you can find at refuserealid.org. So I will leave you at this, and so don't have a wonderful day, and don't forget to just engage on this issue with your legislators and with Senator Paul. So thanks so much for joining us today. Bye for now.